Um, I'm going to talk about two models. One of them is the Master-Apprentice Language Program, and the other one is the Breath of Life archival workshops and institutes for languages without speakers. So the folks in Canberra are interested in that second one because there's some really good archives there that people could make use of. I don't know, maybe Melbourne too. So let me just start out with the question that maybe I don't need to ask this audience, and that is, what is language revitalization? So it's a response by Indigenous and minority groups or individuals to language loss. And it's done within communities whose heritage language is no longer being spoken regularly by most people, or in extreme cases where no one even knows the language anymore. It begins with the desire within a community of some community members to learn the heritage language if they don't know it, and to see it in use again. It may involve many different goals, which may change over time. It may begin with one person just saying, I want to know what materials exist on my language, or I want to know a word that I could name my child with. And the goals will grow. It may involve different activities by different people, some of them community-wide and some of them undertaken by individuals on their own. And it's generally a part of a more general movement of cultural revitalization and the quest for civil rights and autonomy, that is the desire of people to determine their own future. It may or may not involve outside consultants, such as linguists, applied linguists, technological experts, and so on. And it's not the same as language documentation, although it may involve the creation or the use of documentation. So it's a growing movement around the world that's getting strong and stronger in Australia, as well as other places, North America, New Zealand, and Europe, many other places in the world. So the most common goal of people who are trying to do language revitalization is, naturally, new speakers. That's more or less the definition of language revitalization. How can we get new speakers in our community? If children are not learning their ancestral language at home, then how can language revitalization happen? How can a community establish a new generation of speakers? Well, one thing that's been very effective in places like New Zealand and Hawaii has been the language survival schools. So these are language nests and immersion schools. And they're really great for developing new speakers. These are immersion schools where all language of instruction takes place in the language. And usually the immersion schools also have a great deal of cultural teaching as well. So, for example, in Hawaii, it's required that students take either when they're in high school, they'll either take chant, ceremonial chant, or hula dance, or Hawaiian navigation, or all three. So it's very effective because the children will learn at a young age. The language nests are preschool. In fact, nowadays in Hilo, at least, you can send your child to, if both parents work and you're trying to use the language at home, you can send your children to daycare at 6 weeks of age. And you can go all the way to a PhD with Hawaiian being the primary language of instruction nowadays. Relatively large numbers of speakers can be generated this way, since everybody has to go to school. And it also allows the development of a culture and community of language revitalization. So the families and the children themselves are becoming language activists in the process of going to this school. Well, language survival schools have not been especially strong, to my understanding, in Australia, and nor have they been strong outside of Hawaii in the United States, and especially California. Now, why is this? Well, a lot of it has to do with language diversity. In Hawaii and in New Zealand, there is exactly one indigenous language in each of those locations. And that means that there's large populations of people who are of Maori descent or Hawaiian descent. There's still quite a few speakers. The universities can provide a great deal of training. You can actually learn Hawaiian or Maori if you hadn't already gone to school in it. You can learn it very well at the university. There's the government can provide a great deal of help. And no Maori or Hawaiian would say that it's easy, but compared to someplace like California, where there's about 100 different languages with very small populations each, the ease of finding resources is much greater. And the same thing is true of Australia, of course. The language diversity in both these locations is immense. It means small populations, human resources are much fewer, and as well as economic and political resources. And in California and in much of Australia, most languages have almost no speakers left. There's about 5 or fewer speakers now of the 50 languages in California that still have any speakers, and there's another close to 50 that have no speakers at all. So in a case like this, who can teach the language? Well, what we've got in California and in Arizona, in much of the United States and in Australia is the missing generation, or generations, I should say. That's the generation who didn't learn their language. Very often, though, this generation it consists of the strongest language activists. They're the ones that know what it means to not grow up with their heritage language. And they're the ones who want it the most. And so they're very active. They're often the authors of whatever language revitalization is going on. So part of the challenge then for small languages is to get this generation, these people who are adults but who are the language activists, to get them to learn the language, or to help them. They want to learn the language, to help them learn the language. In this kind of situation, the Advocates for Indigenous California Language Survival was developed. It started out with a conference in 1992 where about 200 California Indians came. And this group, the Advocates, we hadn't even named ourselves yet, but we hadn't even formed yet, but we were saying, well, what will help you in your quest for language revitalization? And everybody said, new speakers. We've got to have new speakers. How can we learn the language, or how can we help others learn the language? This is us, the board, and I'm a advisory board member, and Marina is the administrator. Now, before that meeting, I had a talk with Julian Lang. He's Karuk. This is him with his wife, Lynn Riesling, who's wearing the traditional tattoos, chin tattoos of California Indians. And Julian said something to me. He said, you know, I can't go, he said, to this conference, but here's what I think. He says our language, Karuk, is going to be dead in 10 years. All the speakers are going to be dead in 10 years. Now, this was 20 years ago, and he was wrong, because there's actually 4 or 5 speakers left, but at the time there were 50. And he said, you know, if every speaker would take on the responsibility to teach just one young person our language, then our language would stay alive for another 50 or 60 years. And so that was the inspiration for developing the Master-Apprentice Language Learning Program. Here's one of 50 or 60 photos we have of groups during trainings. We've trained over 100 teams in California, typically consisting of one native speaker paired up with one member of the younger generation for about 35 different California languages. And some of these groups have gone on to develop their own Master-Apprentice program so that they may have at any time 5 or 6 or more teams of Master-Apprentice teams that are working together. So the Master-Apprentice Language Learning Program, the goal is for the apprentice to gain conversational proficiency in the language. And the team is supposed to spend 10 or 20 hours per week together, 10 minimum. The best teams live together or move in together. They are supposed to stay immersed in the language while living their daily lives. We're saying, well, so long as you're together, you can do whatever you have to do, whether it's washing clothes or shopping or fishing or whatever it is. Just be sure that whatever you're doing is in the language. It's focused on oral learning of language that people can use in their everyday life. So the main principles, first of all, is immersion, leave English behind. And I'm going to talk about each of these in a little bit more detail. We train people to make themselves understood through nonverbal communication as part of the immersion process when people don't understand each other. We try to make sure they understand to focus on verbs and whole sentences rather than what people who are not professional teachers tend to do, which is say, okay, we'll do numbers, we'll do colors, we'll do animals. And they teach and learn through activities. So the activity itself is an important part of the nonverbal aspect of communication. We talk a lot about repetition. There's a saying we have that it's the 20 by 20 rule. You have to hear or say a word or phrase at least 20 times in at least 20 different situations before you've mastered it. So the idea is to keep the speaker from saying, I taught you that word last week, how come you don't know it yet? Right? And to get the apprentice to understand that it's okay that he doesn't know it yet. I'll talk about grammar a little bit. So you focus on useful language. And to me, the most important part of the Master-Apprentice Program is that the apprentice is a proactive learner. That is that the apprentice is not sitting there waiting for the speaker to teach him something. The apprentice is a language hunter. This is a word that was developed by a man named Evan who runs another technique called Where Are Your Keys that you could look up on the computer if you like. It's a game-based way of language learning. And Master-Apprentice will just take anything it can find. And the apprentice also teaches what he or she learns. So when we put out calls for applications, that's one of the primary things we look at is what is the goal of the apprentice. If the apprentice is just trying to learn the language for himself or do research or something where there's no interest in passing on the language, he's less likely to get chosen. So leave English behind. Easier said than done. How do people leave English behind when one of them doesn't know the language? It's difficult for both the speaker and the learner. The speaker, usually in an endangered language, has not even been speaking his language for a long time. he's been using English as his language of communication. And so one of the challenges at first is to get the speaker to get back into the habit of using the language. And of course, when you're speaking to somebody who doesn't understand you, that also is a great deterrent to using your language. So there's various things that we do to help the team learn how to immerse themselves. One of them is reminder. So in the very first training, people learn how to say things in the language, like, oh, let's talk in our language, or say that in our language. Another thing is immersion sets. So this is a way to give people a little bit of relief from not understanding each other and so on. So we say, all right, at first you can use English as your planning language. So let's say that you might say in English, all right, what we're going to do is we're going to learn about how to serve tea in our language. And the apprentice might say, all right, so as the master, you tell me what to do, and I'll do it. And you have to show me sometimes what to do with nonverbal communication. And then I'll do it, and I'll also maybe try to repeat what you said, but or maybe repeat just one word that you said. And meanwhile, I'm going to do this activity, and now for 20 minutes, we're not going to speak any English while we try to do this. Right? So that would be the planning in English, but then you have this boundary between that and using the language. And those immersion sets get longer and longer over time, so that a few months in, hopefully, even the planning will take place in English. I mean, in the target language. Nonverbal communication includes gestures, facial expressions, mimicking actions, objects, pictures, books. One of my favorite things is wordless books. I'll talk about them some more. I brought one of them with me. These are just storybooks that you can find in a kid's bookstore, where the story is told in pictures. So nobody is tempted to try to just translate or look to the words instead of the pictures. Games, the activity itself is nonverbal communication. So the very first exercise that we do during a first training of a team is to hand out cards, little 3x5 cards. We usually just write them up and pass them out as right during the training. And so somebody gets a card, which you can't show to anybody else, and this card it's really a getting somebody to do something card. So it'll say something like, get someone to bring you a cup of tea, or get someone to sit on someone else's lap, or get someone to give you $1. So without using any language, the exercise is to use whatever nonverbal communication you can to get somebody to do this. So it's good practice for the nonverbal communication aspect of immersion. I mentioned the apprentice is a language hunter. So the second exercise that you do in the first training is to have the apprentice start learning how to ask questions, how to ask for language in the language. So what is this now is one question. It may not be, there's all kinds of reasons why it's not going to be directly what is this translated. There's, for example, some languages have different questions depending on the shape of the object. So the apprentice will have to go through that kind of issue first. Or it's often, when you're working with an elder, impolite to ask a direct question. So it might be that you have to figure out some other way of asking what is the name of this object. But people make it through. Or what is he doing? So when you're looking at these books, the apprentice can ask, what is he doing? What is he doing? And in this way, the apprentice can guide his own language learning while immersed in the language. They don't learn all of these in the first session, but they take home the list, and that's part of their early work, is to learn how to ask all these questions. So if you're doing an activity where the master is telling you what to do while you do it, like cooking, say, or washing clothes, you might want to learn how to ask, what'll I do next, just to elicit more language. And say it again, say it slower. These are very important language survival tools for the apprentice. The reminder phrases, let's talk in our language, or say that in our language. And some kind of frustration phrase, like I don't understand, or let's do something else, or time out for a while. Then exercise 3 is generally, this is actually the first exercise where they're doing real immersion. And we generally say, okay, for half an hour, there's going to be no English as the speaker is telling you about these pictures, if you're a beginning learner, and you are asking questions, simple questions like, what is this, or what is that person doing? And it's amazing. People don't even want to stop after half an hour. This is a very it's easy on people to do immersion in this situation because you've got the pictures right in front of you. So as a speaker, you know that the apprentice is understanding what's going on in the picture, and so therefore there's no lack of understanding, even if he doesn't know the words. And the apprentice also feels at ease in this kind of situation because the nonverbal is so strong, the nonverbal communication. As we say, you focus on oral learning, so you don't have to know how to write your language in order to teach it or learn it. This was very important to us at the beginning because we kept hearing people say, well, I can't learn my language because I can't write it. Or we can't have language revitalization because we don't have an official writing system. And but we maintain you don't have to know how to write your language. And in fact, in some people that know how to write their language, often the immersion process is subverted by it because people are just writing everything down instead of trying to communicate with each other. And so we suggest that people not write, at least not write during an immersion session. We suggest at the end of a session together, say take 15 minutes and talk about writing down some of the words if you want, but not during the immersion session. Also, we suggest that people record rather than write. That way you feel like you've still grasped the words that are flying by so quick, and they also are great because they're documenting your speaker. Teaching and learning through activities. Activities can be anything that people are doing, and we're always at a challenge of finding activities as an exercise when we're together in a training, because that's not the same as when they're actually living their lives together. But we'll do things like table setting or something like that. And what I'm picturing here is an activity we sometimes do where we give people kits of felt and glue and scissors, and they're supposed to make finger puppets. There's some finger puppets that one group made, and then they make then they do skits also with the finger puppets. So this is the apprentice made a bear and the master made a hen, and now the bear, they're doing a skit where the bear is courting the hen and the hen's having nothing to do with him. But in real life, these are going to be the kinds of things that people do: cooking and eating, housework, errands, shopping, hunting, gathering, fishing. I know some of the apprentices in Miramas, they're just going to go fishing all the time. That's what they said last year. We'll see what they have done. Ceremonial, singing, driving, taking walks, traditional games, board games of various sorts. So they can watch TV but turn off the sound. Right? There's people, this team sings together. It's an illustration of a group that likes to do traditional games. And then what we mean by useful language, language that you can do every day, language you can use in real communication. And we encourage people that when they want to decide what to practice, that they should think not in terms of vocabulary, but in terms of situations. So what is a situation that a team would like to master? So it might be talking about weather. It might be making a coffee or tea. Maybe that's a ritual that you do every time you get together. Anything that you do every time you get together, you need to try to learn that first. So whether it's greetings or whatever. Telling stories about the way your day went yesterday. So what about grammar? Well, there's two definitions of grammar. One of them is the knowledge of the structure of a language that allows a speaker to speak it. And he doesn't necessarily have conscious knowledge of the language, right? It's not, of the grammar. When a child learns his first language, he learns the appropriate grammar without knowing the words, like what a noun is or what a verb is. And the second definition of grammar then is the description of what a native speaker knows in order to speak the language. And the description may involve linguistic jargon, grammar terms. But you don't have to learn the second in order to acquire the first. So there's a lot of difference that applied linguists talk about the difference between acquiring a language and learning about a language. So I've got to talk about my grandchild, who's not quite 2 now, and he's very involved in language learning. He's got a vocabulary probably of, 500 words, and he's putting words together, and he has some stock phrases, but he still doesn't know the grammar, right? But he is so capable of communicating through a combination of nonverbal communication and just putting what he knows together. Right? So he's being potty trained too, and whenever he actually goes in the toilet, his mother says, I'm so proud of you. And so she emailed me saying that the other day he went in the toilet and then he looked up at her and said, so proud of you. Right? So he's still struggling with me and you, but he's using language all the time, and he hears the correct forms and he copies them, and eventually he'll get them right. So we would like a Master-Apprentice team to be like that. We would like the apprentice to just use whatever the apprentice knows, whether the grammar's right or not. And we'd like the master not to criticize, right? So we'd like the master to be proud of you, right? And so we talk a lot about the apprentice learning not to fear errors, and the master to correct by modeling but not by criticizing, and trying not to laugh too much. And the apprentice has to learn to accept laughter. So have fun. This is the learner should be physically and emotionally active, and they should be having fun together, even if it means not using the language quite right. We always tell the master that he or she can get the apprentice to do anything the master wants, so long as it's in the language. Right? So the apprentice ought to be chopping the wood here in this picture. You can get the apprentice to clean your house, whatever. This is our manual. It's called How to Keep Your Language Alive, published by Heyday Books. If you want a copy, you can order it through the web. This is it's become very popular, so we've started to We've started to do a lot of training outside of California as well. People will ask us to come. And it's popular partly because it can be fun. There's no need for books or classrooms or professionals. You can do it without having professional teachers. And it provides oral conversational skills. And people who have been working on trying to learn their language for a long time often say, this is the first time I've actually learned how to speak in my language. So the spread of the program, just a few of the places that we've been doing training. Here's a group in Kodiak Island. We've done a lot of training with a lot of languages in Oklahoma. British Columbia has a group that's somewhat like the Advocates, and so they're also running a multilingual Master-Apprentice. They finished their first 3 years about a year ago of 15 teams in 15 different languages, and now they're doing the next 3 years of 15 more teams in different languages. We have come to Australia. We've trained in Kununurra, so there's a Mirawong group of Master-Apprentice teams. So that's down under, then also up over Nunavut, up on the Arctic Ocean in Canada. And last spring, I even did training for Gaelic, the first European endangered language, in Nova Scotia. So what activities people do really differs a lot from language to language. So in Nova Scotia, people get together and they sing and they dance, and every night during this training workshop, people would be singing and dancing or playing the fiddle until about 2 or 3 a.m. This is a picture of people doing a milling song where in the old days people would make cloth and then all the neighbors would come and you'd wet the cloth, and then for hours you'd just be pounding this cloth to soften it and sing songs in the process. So people don't actually do the milling anymore, but they still have the milling tables and a piece of cloth so that they can continue to sing the songs. In Miramar, in Kununurra, the idea of being outside was really important for language, and so a lot of so there was field trips that we took during the workshop where the language felt more natural for people to use. In Nunavut, on the other hand, where it was minus 54 degrees, outside wasn't really an issue. So, but making clothing, now that's an important part of survival in that part of the world. They also did a lot of square dancing, and people realized, the elders said, oh, you know, we used to do square dance calls in our language. And they hadn't done it for a long time, but they started doing it, so all during the workshops, square dancing was the one thing that just took place over and over again. String figures were a lot of fun for people. There was an immersion luncheon where people, where the apprentices learned some things that they had never done before, such as preparing caribou feet for eating, bannock. And then something very moving was when Kate came in with a seal oil lamp and said she was going to light it without a match or without a lighter, as people used to do in the old days. And when she was growing up, they lived in an igloo during the winter, and the seal oil lamp, this tiny lamp, was the only source of heat, light, and cooking. And she said it was hard to light, and she remembered as a child just crying with happiness when it got lit, because it meant they'd be warm and they'd have light and they'd have warm food that night. So over the next 2 weeks, we're going to go up with, are you going, Susan? Yeah, and Margaret Flory and the Eichels board members are going to be flying over, and we'll be doing this Training the Trainers workshop one in Alice Springs and the other in Kununurra. So what's happening then is that the people that we're training them not to be a Master-Apprentice team, but to train Master-Apprentice teams. And it's going to be very exciting to see how that works out. But going back to '92, when ICLES was first formed, the Advocates, one of our board members, Elle Frank, who some people have met here because she was one of the trainers in Kununurra, kept saying, hey, what about the languages that don't have any speakers? And she is a descendant of 2 extinct languages. We like to call them sleeping languages. Now, she always introduces herself by saying, hello, I'm Elle Frank, and I'm extinct. Now, Australia has done some work with this notion of language revitalization through documentation. And wanted to point out Nick Thieberger's book, Paper and Talk, which has a lot about language revitalization from documentation. And Rob Amory, whose family is here tonight, has done a lot of work on Kaurna, a language that had no native speakers for a long time, still doesn't, I guess, but they are learning and using the language now in speeches, prayers, naming, and so on. And it all comes from language documentation. So what we did in California was develop another program called the Breath of Life Language Workshop for California Indians without speakers. And Elle Frank did this illustration, which I thought was really lovely. She always writes backwards. But this is, so these are papers that are taking off and becoming birds and butterflies. In other words, they're going back into the air. The language is regaining the breath of life. So for every other year since '94, I think, we've been having a 1-week intensive workshop in Berkeley. This is a picture of the group from 2010. So Berkeley, UC Berkeley has 4 major archives and of California Indian languages. So done by, these are all the field notes that were developed by anthropologists and linguists over the 100 years or so of Berkeley's existence, and recordings that were done. So there's the one in our department is the Survey of California and Other Indian Languages, where field notes taken by, or copies of field notes that were made by students and faculty since the founding of the department in 1952 are held. And we also have some older forms that were just given to us by chance. This one is a major manuscript that was misplaced at one time. It was done in the 1920s, and it's the only set of field notes about Chochenyo language. It was made by J.P. Harrington. It's a picture of him. There's the Berkeley Language Center, which holds the physical recordings made from the linguistics department. The Bancroft Library, which holds all of the older records of the anthropology department during all the field work that they did, especially when anthropologists knew how to do linguistics. The Hearst Museum, which holds all of the physical recordings from the anthropology department, starting way back when wax cylinders were first invented. And all of these archives are now being digitized and being virtually connected. So just this year, the California Language Archive opened up, which is a virtual archive of digitized documents and recordings from all 4 of the big archives on campus. It's not complete yet. So every year there's about 60 or so applicants that are accepted. We can't take any more than that. They stay in the dorms at Berkeley, so we do it in the summer when the dorms are available. And so in 2010, we had 25 languages from the 60 language hunters with 25 different languages. These are some of the languages organized by family. And what we do at Breath of Life is familiarize participants with the Berkeley archives and help them find materials on their languages. They can come anytime. They don't just have to be invited to come, but people don't tend to come because they feel like a university is too scary and too foreign to them. And so getting them familiar with the university so that they know how to handle it and how to come whenever they feel like it is a big part of it. And we teach the fundamentals of linguistics so that they can begin to read and interpret these materials. And we discuss and demonstrate ways that the materials can be utilized for purposes of language learning and language revitalization, and give optional short workshops on computer technology or dictionary making, language teaching methods, songwriting, developing your own writing system, and so forth. And so the schedule is that Monday through Friday they get linguistics workshops in the morning, and in the afternoons they tour the archives, do research, go back to do research in those archives, and take the optional workshops. In the evening they have homework, and we get them to focus on a particular project because otherwise it can be very overwhelming. So Saturday morning is the project presentations where all of the participants present their projects. It's a couple of nice photos. It's hard to take really good photos, action photos of people at computers, but Scott really has done a marvelous job of that. Phonetics lesson. But in phonetics, for example, we focus more on learning how to read phonetics than how to write phonetics, right? And because people have to read material like this. Now for projects, these are just a few photos of a few people presenting their projects on Saturday. This group was a group of Obispeño sisters or cousins who decided that their project in 2010 would be learning the relationship terms, kinship terms for their relatives, and then dedicating themselves from then on to always use those terms with their relatives. This one was less profound, but fun, where the Tongva participants translated the, put your right foot in, put your right foot out, into Tongva. Another Tongva participant gave an immersion lesson. This individual is working with his linguistic mentor, who I'll be talking about linguistic mentors in a moment, to hold the first conversation in 100 years. The Mutsun group, they've always been our stars. One year they translated green eggs and ham into the Mutsun language by Dr. Seuss. Another year they did a card game where they just learned how to play cards in their language. I can't even remember what this project was, but it was a nice photo. So mentors, every language group has a mentor who is a linguistics graduate student or faculty member. And what the mentors do is they may never even have done any research on that particular language before, but they are assigned a language in advance, say a month in advance, and so they have to spend a month researching the language and learning everything they can about it. They contact the people they'll be working with in advance, get to know them a little bit, help people register at the dorms, spend the week with them at workshop sessions and the archives, and help them learn basic linguistic principles. And they help them with the homework and the project too. So it's really like almost a 24-hour job, especially if the mentors are staying in the dorms with the participants. And I wanted to give you one more example of a project. So this is Deborah Miranda, who is Esalen, and she's also a professional poet, and she teaches at a university on the East Coast. And she wrote a poem. I thought it was a very moving poem in Esalen as her week's project. I won't read the whole thing to you, but you can read the translations that are under the Esalen versions. The last couple of lines. We dance on the cliff of the world. I feel you in my spine, my throat, my womb. You are a river, I am the rain. It's true, it is true, it is true, it is true. My language, our language, breath of life. And she writes after that, says, this is my first poem in Esalen. If this poem were a child, then Louise, that's her sister who attended with her, and Ruth, that was her mentor, would be the midwives. And the Breath of Life Conference would be the birthplace or homeland. So Breath of Life has also become kind of popular as something to try in other places. So at the University of Oklahoma now they have a Breath of Life every other year. And last year, a former mentor and I got a grant to do a national Breath of Life Archival Institute for Indigenous Languages. And so that involved going to the Library of Congress and the National Anthropological Archives for the vast recordings and field notes that were in these locations. And also the Museum of the American Indian was where we spent the mornings with our workshops. So this is most of our group. And a couple of photos of people researching at the National Anthropological Archives. Photos turned out to be really important to people. People were finding photos of their own relatives, their own ancestors, and so they became more popular even than language, but I had to get at least one photo of people studying language. And right now we're just, we have a call out for both participants and mentors for the 2012 Breath of Life at Berkeley, and then we just found out we got funding for 2013 in Washington, D.C. again. So the last thing I want to talk about is what are people doing with these kinds of efforts? And I just briefly want to talk about two very successful language learners that we have had at Breath of Life as inspiration. They'd learned their language before Breath of Life was ever founded, but one of them is Jessie Littledoe Baird, who worked under Ken Hale, who a lot of you know of because he was a very strong linguist here in Australia. She was his last student. She had decided that she had to learn linguistics in order to learn her language. And her language, Wampanoag, had not been spoken for 150 years. And it was the language that met the Mayflower, when the Mayflower came in, the first people from England to establish colonies here. And, I mean, there. So Luckily, there was a lot of documentation on the language that had been done by missionaries. And so she has learned her language fluently. She and her husband have decided that they would use the language at home and had a child that they could teach the language to. And so they've got a 6-year-old child who knows Wampanoag fluently. And she's also started a Master-Apprentice Program, so that she's now doing oral teaching of 4 apprentices. And she recently got what we in the United States call the MacArthur Genius Award for her work in language revitalization. Daryl Baldwin has a very similar story. There was a student at Berkeley who did his dissertation on Daryl's ancestral language. It was Miami. There were no speakers left of Miami. The last speaker died when Daryl was probably not quite born yet. And but again, there was a lot of documentation. And so what David Costa, our student, did was decide to write a grammar of Miami based on all of this. It was basically documentation in the form of things like Bible translations and letters. There was a brief period when the Miamis were writing letters to each other in the 1800s. Things like that. And so he wrote a grammar. And the way Daryl tells this story is, he said, I was so excited, I just couldn't wait for this grammar to arrive. And it arrived in the mail. It was done. David had gotten his PhD. I opened it up, and I couldn't understand a word, he said. So he decided also he was going to have to get an MA in linguistics. He got an MA in linguistics, started being able to read the grammar, started being able to make his own interpretations from the documentation. And he also is a fluent speaker who has raised 4 children in the language. They're all college age now. And again, they're fluent speakers. He's also a leader in language revitalization in his own community, runs summer workshops and runs a program at the university where he now works for Miami students. So these both show how just even one person can really begin a movement for their language. And that's from documentation, so that's sort of breath of life oriented, but I want to go back finally to Master-Apprentice as well, because there's many Master-Apprentice people who have gone on to use their language at home as well. And I'm editing a book now called Bringing Our Languages Home, Language Revitalization for Families. And this family, a Karuk family, wrote one of the chapters. And so this is taken from the chapter they wrote. I found out I was pregnant with our first son in the spring of 2003 when I was 20 years old. Phil was 23 and preparing to graduate from college. It was a stressful time in our lives. I hung up the phone with the midwife and looked at Phil's wide eyes. All he had to say was, "We have 9 months to become fluent." And I'll just end with the way they end that chapter, which is in Karuk, they write, "We love, we laugh, and we speak in Karuk." Thank you.